And that if you're if you're at skill level 0,
Yeah.
I think anybody that has a sports mind of any kind really knows that when you practice well, you get better quicker.
Yes.
So your ability in the moment to react, to respond in a joy way is directly connected to how well you're practicing.
Yes.
Right. There is there's a statement: practice makes permanent instead of perfect. Right.
Yeah.
Whatever the shape of your practice is what you end up operating in automatically. And so your statement that, I made my intention clear. I'm going to try a new thing, announcing that, set her up for, well, he may not be good at it, but it also created the expectation that you're going to keep trying a new thing.
Yes.
Right. And now you both get to partner in a new skill, which by itself is a joy activity. Mm-hmm. There is an agreement that I am going to start something. I'm going to share that with you, and you're going to expect I'm going to continue it.
Yeah, I love that. And that's exactly right. If we practice on the good days, the skill will be more likely to show up on the bad days. And if we practice with manageable emotions and even positive emotion like joy, then that's exactly right. That practice does make permanent, and it'll start showing up. And I find if we don't practice and we just try to do it under those hard conditions, it often doesn't go so well because our brain wants to do whatever those unhelpful pathways are. We're going to probably do some of the things we don't want to do. So practice on the good days so that these skills and habits will show up on the hard days. And a little bit goes a long way. I tell friends, it's not about doing this perfectly. It's about practicing and being teachable. My wife is going to have some good feedback from me. If there's something I can improve and some ways that I can grow, she's going to let me know. If I say, honey, well, how did that go? Is there anything, that I could have done differently? She's going to tell me. She's motivated for both of us to learn these skills and to do a better job at sailing through the troubled waters and getting through it in one piece.
So I want to pause for our analytical thinkers. I want to make sure they heard something that you said, that just because your spouse has emotions does not mean they are in enemy mode because they are feeling sad, angry,
that's right,
distressed. But you said enemy mode is kind of crouching at the door.
Yeah.
That if this person is expressing these emotions to you and you abandon them or try to problem solve, or you are in enemy mode, that enemy mode cycle is right there posed to be when our relationship circuits are off. In fact, I wrote this quote down: communication is useless and even dangerous if your relational circuits are not on. So even as you were talking about validating your spouse when you didn't do something and it hurt her feelings, it sounds like you need to be having your relational circuits on and to be regulated before you attempt validation. Yes. Would that be correct?
Perfect. That's a great way to put it right there, because that's exactly right. If I know if my brain slips into enemy mode, I'm going to focus on self-preservation and trying to put the fire out as quickly as possible, throwing whatever buckets I have at the fire. And there might be some gasoline in those buckets that I'm throwing on the fire. So that's exactly right. We focus on getting my oxygen mask on first, as I then try to share that emotion with my wife. Or I know I'm in enemy mode if I'm just trying to make it go away. I'm not able to hear what she's saying. I'm not able to put myself in her shoes. And I know as a parent as well, I know I'm in enemy mode if I'm focusing on behavior, results, and outcomes rather than character and relationship. So relational mode, I'm focused on the relationship. And I focused on building some joy here and molding character. But when I slip into enemy mode, there's some telltale signs. And I'm going to be focused on, results or outcomes and obedience, so to speak, rather than relationship. So just something as simple as recognizing relational mode and enemy mode. That's really why I wrote the Joy Switch book, was just what are some practical ways we can learn to recognize if we're in relational mode, what shows up when you're in relational mode and what shows up when you're in enemy mode. And the goal is that we get really good at identifying when we've lost our peace. Like, oh, my peace just flew out the window. I better get that peace back before I try to work this out with my wife, or this isn't going to go so well.
Yeah. And I think too, just like in kind of reading the three together, I would say the joy switch kind of gives you the basic understanding of joy circuits, your orbital prefrontal cortex, some of the neuroscience behind it. Then if you're going to have a joy-filled marriage, it probably helps to be a joy-filled person. So as a person, for the 4 habits of the joy-filled people, you can be learning how to return yourself to joy, how to recover from the big 6 emotions, how to return to joy with the Lord and return to refriend. And then maybe you want to work on a joy-filled marriage, especially if the marriage has been fraught with maybe trauma this wide gap. We haven't had joy in 2 years. It's a celibate marriage. We're living 2 separate roles. You even said that when there's a really wide gap, that's when people are living as roommates or business partners. And that's where many of the marriages that we are working with are at. They're business partners and just trying to live side by side and try to keep things from escalating. Was that correct? And kind of how I kind of see those books kind of moving together?
Yep, you got it. Yep, you got it. That, the joy switch is a good starter. How do I get some joy going? By living more relationally. And then, the 4 habits books can kind of build on that with a lot more detail and a lot broader lens here on what are practical ways we can grow joy in our marriages, or, in my community and family, or in my, with my children.
And then joy starts here. Like, if you really want the textbook, if you want to go deep,
that's the deep one.
That's what you like. Okay, I really want to know the foundational stuff. Yep. And then these smaller ones really kind of help get you there a little quicker. Yep. And I like that there are practical tips in here. So one I want to talk about, because I think this is super important with our population, are eye smiles. Because we know that prolonged eye contact is very difficult for people on the spectrum. And that's probably like joy overload. Yeah. The preorbital frontal cortex is behind the right eye. Yeah. So eye contact is so important. So let's kind of talk about eye smiles, the importance of how that helps with relationship circuits.
Yes. Eye smiles are exercises kind of woven through our trainings, woven through a lot of these books as well, is, one of the best ways to grow joy is seeing a face who's glad to be with me, even if it's only for 2 seconds and I look away. So part of what we do with eye smiles is it's just giving people opportunities to just practice and maximize, even if it's just a little bit of eye contact and then we have to avert our gaze. It's learning to see it and feel it. And as I said before, we always go to rest. Joy should always lead to rest. And so some people in our trainings can have a hard time with just eye contact. So what they do, they'll actually spend more time on the quieting than the joy, which actually still builds some joy. So they might only look at someone's face for a moment, and then they'll look away, and they'll actually spend more time looking away. And we say, when you're ready, just try it again when you're ready, and they'll connect for a moment and then they'll look away. And what we're after, the point is not how long can you look at someone. The point is for some joy to start and to feel that little spark of joy. And so just a glance at a face looking away, like that's a win as far as we're concerned, because we want people to notice, how does joy feel? How does that show up in my body? How does that impact me? And it also says that some of us, we actually might have a lot of joy, but we don't rest. So for a lot of people, the eye smiles actually is more of the quieting, and they just take that time to quiet. They'll do little sparks of joy here and there, but it's what they needed was the quieting. Because if we're exhausted, you're not really going to grow joy very well when you're tired and fatigue is present. It's just going to be hard to enter into joy. So being able to quiet is like the hidden, the secret ingredient of building joy is actually being able to quiet together. And your relational brain, comes on with joy. So when you anticipate that joy, when you get relational, you can feel the joy in your body. Enemy mode, we don't care about joy in our body because our brain's, focused on a problem or a pain. So giving people time to quiet together and noticing how quieting really helps make joy a little more possible. So that's just kind of a surprise for a lot of folks. We lead through the Ice Miles practice. We're like, hey, it's okay if you can't even look at that person's face for very long. If it's just for a moment, the goal is to notice what you experienced with that moment. Just try to soak up the quiet together, because what that's going to do is that's actually going to grow your capacity for joy. So the quieting is what really makes joy possible, and in quieting makes joy sustainable. Because if we're tired, your brain's like, no, I don't have it in me here. I can't do this, and I don't want to enter into this. I just want to go to bed because you're tired.
Describe the difference then between quieting together and solitude together.
Yes, good question. So quieting together is a skill actually that's learned in relationship with someone who knows how to rest. And so if you think about it from like the perspective of an infant, a newborn, right? There's going to be a lot of quieting together. And so we learn to quiet, even if baby gets upset, there's some big feelings, there's someone who's with me and I'm not alone. So there's a greater mind that knows what to do with what I feel. And when someone knows what to do with what I feel, then that's going to lead to some quiet together. So it's a very powerful way of bonding. And over time, what happens is what you'll see with children. Over time, they learn quieting, from that mom or dad or caregiver, whoever it is. They're learning, that primary caregiver is teaching them quiet together. And eventually that starts to become internalized. So what children will do is if they're upset, mom or dad or whoever it is not available, then they picture their face. They remember it, and then that helps them to quiet down if they've had a lot of practice of quiet together. So if you have the skill, you can do it on your own, even though it's a relational activity. We can do it. We can take a moment to quiet. Sometimes my wife and I do, if our brains slip it out of relational mode, like, hey, let's just take a moment, quiet. We're quieting together. But if I have the skill on my own, I can quiet when I need a breather. So really, it just comes down to, if the skill's there because I've learned it practicing with someone, then I can do it on my own, and it's restorative. The presence of peace is restorative. If I just isolate and I'm not actually practicing the skill of quieting together, then what happens is I feel alone in it, and it's like a pseudo quieting, just because like we can have a pseudo joy. Our brain can also do a pseudo quieting, which is this: I'm doing something to counterfeit for the real thing. And so it's possible to be isolated and not actually quiet yourself. The goal is, if I have the skill, I can take that breather, and quieting is the on-demand release of serotonin. So if I have the skill, my nervous system and my body recognize it. I haven't quieted very much recently. I need a breather. And so it's fine if you're on your own and you're not interacting with people, if you have that skill of quieting and just feeling refreshed as your body and your mind are still. It's just that little pause. It doesn't have to be a long pause. But if I don't have the quieting, this was a big skill that my wife had to really focus on in her skill journey here. So what helped her was quieting with friends. We would quiet together. We'd practice. I'm like, I'm going to set a timer for 30 seconds. Let's see if we could just take some deep breaths and be still. And for her brain, that was miserable. Like 30 seconds, she just thought, this is just intolerable. I don't like this one bit. Why am I doing this? Because what would happen is her brain, had a negative association with quieting. She avoided quieting, right? Because when she would quiet, that's when some of those feelings that have been there start to bubble up a little bit when we're quieting. So this is why a lot of people try to go to bed at night and they're tossing and turning and they're thinking about things they don't even want to be thinking about because they're tired and they just want to go to sleep. But the brain says, oh, you're quiet. Hey, I want to talk to you about some things. And that's often when a lot of those things come up, you're trying to go to bed and your mind is just spinning and spinning and spinning, that's because you're finally quieting from your day. And your brain's like, okay, well, we got some things to talk about. I've been waiting for you to slow down. I want to talk to you here. So taking a little bit of time to quiet before bed or quiet as a family. And like our sons are 12 and 13 right now. Quieting is not a fun thing for them to do, right? They want to play, they want to do stuff. But we'll say, let's take a breather. And sometimes setting a timer helps because they'll know there's going to be an end to it. So, hey, I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes. Let's just take a moment and let's catch our breath before we go on and do whatever it is we're going to do. And so we practice quieting, and then we just talk about, how did this go for you? What did you notice when you were trying to quiet yourself? And for some people, it's like, oh, that was awful. I don't want to do that again. That was miserable. But over time, and this was the case for me, as I started practicing this skill, at first it was miserable because there was 100,000 other things I'd rather be doing in that moment. My brain wanted to do something else. But as I would practice the quieting skill over time, I started to crave quieting. Like once I started learning this skill, and I'm someone that's actually more comfortable being on my own, even though I'm a relational introvert. So I actually am restored by being on my own. I love interaction. I love people, but I'm an introvert. So I feel refreshed through quieting and through having some quiet time to journal, pray, read, whatever it is that I'm doing. Whereas my wife, she's a relational extrovert. So she is actually restored by interacting. So if she's, her joy is low and she's having a hard time quieting, interacting with her is going to make quieting more accessible. And she's refreshed by the interaction. Whereas me, I'm refreshed by just having some downtime for a little bit. So it's interesting how, as we start to learn some of these things, how it all can play out.
Yeah, that definitely is true for us as well. When I started doing silence retreats, I hated it at first. And now I'm like, oh yeah, 1 day is not enough. 3 days. Yes. I want 3 days. And you're talking about quieting. I think a huge thing I'm hoping the listeners heard is it's not just about solitude and doing what I want, because you can numb or anesthetize yourself through YouTube videos or watching sports stats or whatever. That's not really quieting and restoring your brain. You've got some solitude, but you're calling it like fake quieting, kind of like pseudo quieting, just like there's pseudo joys like addictions or sugar or comfort food.
Yeah.
It relieves a negative feeling, but it's not really joy because I can't do joy if I'm not in relationship with someone else.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And there's a term, I think it came out in like the 90s, maybe 2000, I guess, but it was called email apnea. And basically it just means about 2/3 of us hold our breath when we pick up our phone. So I always tell people, as you said, technology, as great as it is in all the amazing ways, it does things for us. It doesn't help you quiet. And it's actually going to make it harder for you to quiet. And so I tell people, just notice your breathing. Like your body's the canvas for your brain. So whatever's happening between your ears is going to show up in your body. And as we learn to pay attention to our body, we go, wow, my muscles are tight. I'm holding my breath. So take those deep breaths and try to practice. And what you'll find if you start learning the skill, joy becomes more accessible to you when you have a fully charged battery. When our batteries are depleted, joy just feels like another task, right? And your brain turns to enemy mode to solve problems. And so it's going to be hard to get out of enemy mode, but quieting can actually help us get back in relational mode. And it helps us notice what's happening in our body, and it helps us get back to our relational selves, so to speak. So quieting is just the gift that keeps on giving, because if I can quiet, I can help my family quiet. I can invite friends to take a breather if it looks like they need a quiet. It's a chance we can quiet while we pray for each other. Just like I just often will tell people, how's your breathing right now? What's going on in your breathing? And they go, oh, wow, I was holding my breath. And it's like if I'm sitting across from them and I'm holding my breath, all of a sudden I notice they're breathing. Are they breathing over there? Are they holding their breath? Well, let's take a moment to breathe. And so at first it feels a little clunky. Like, what's my breathing or body have to do with anything? I'm like, well, it's a chance to practice some quieting so that then we can start practicing some joy.
Anything else you want to know as we start to end our show today?
No, I think we covered it. Just the making sure that the quieting doesn't mean actually not just saying stuff.
Right.
Right. Going back to the FM analogy, this is still owning the fact that the signal's coming in, but self-turning down the volume.
Yes.
And I think, a good example of this kind of happened to us this week. We had a date night planned. We have one night a week kind of set aside.
Yeah.
And Dan comes home and says, I have some bad news. I'm really exhausted and I'm really tired. So the initial plan was not going to happen, but we switched to something that was a low energy kind of connection point. I think we use these. I get no money for talking about these, but these mini dates. There was one on there that said, pick a song that reminds you of your spouse's personality. Pick a song that reminds you of your relationship. And so then talk about it and listen to the song and, sharing that together. It was like 15 minutes, but it was quiet, low joy building for the amount of energy that was there. Like if I would have pushed Dan to that probably wouldn't have gone well. But we, finding that thing that we could still do with low energy to still produce that time together. It's more about that intentionality and practice, as you say.
Yeah, that's right.
What's a takeaway point you want for listeners to hear about either Joy Switch or joy-filled marriage, or just summarizing what we've talked about today?
Yeah, you know what? One of the skills that we can do, it doesn't cost us a penny to do this skill, is reflecting on times of joy. And we often call it's what our skill 4 in the 19 skills, which is create appreciation. So appreciation is what I call packaged joy gifts that we can unwrap. So we practice appreciation by remembering moments of joy. So often at the dinner table, I'll ask my kids, hey, what was a joyful moment from your day? Like, let's all share a joyful moment from our day. And so what happens is when you remember that joyful moment, your brain responds as though you've gone back in time and you're reliving it all over again. So you remember it, you feel it, and you share it. And so when you remember the good stuff and you start to feel the good stuff, you'll feel it in your body and you'll start getting relational. And when you share it, even your listeners will start to feel some of that joy. And then your brain's kind of primed for looking for joy. And so practicing appreciation is basically trains our brain to scan the environment for the good stuff instead of the bad stuff. Because if we don't have a lot of appreciation, our brain becomes critical and we start looking for problems. And if you're looking for problems, you're going to find problems. So practicing, appreciation doesn't dismiss the problems. It actually gives us capacity to deal with the problems. So just as practical as, reflecting on joyful moments from your day, your week, and being able to feel it and share that, like that is just one of those skills that I found helps with joy. It helps with quieting. It grows our battery. It grows our capacity so we can better navigate the hard stuff. It is just a win. So just practicing appreciation, unwrapping those packaged joy gifts is a great thing to be practicing.
I definitely want to tell our listeners about your website. We've already mentioned the 4 habits of joy-filled marriage and joy-filled people. And there are exercises in here step by step that you could practice, but also Thrive Works or Thrive Today has some like Shalom My Body and all those kinds of things. So will you kind of tell people where to find that and a couple of things they might find on that site?
Yeah. So the website's Thrive Today, all one word, thrivetoday.org. And we have a lot of stuff on this website. We have a lot of videos. We post videos that we've done. You can look at the 19 skills and you can click on each skill and there's a video that goes with it. And we even have resources to go with each skill. So if somebody says, that quieting thing, I'd like to learn more, we click on that skill 2 of the 19 skills and you'll get all kinds of resources. And we have a 10-minute podcast that basically just shares stories of people using relational skills, because the goal here is to make this as practical as it can be. And so that 10-minute podcast could be helpful. It's just relational skills in real life. And they can find that on our website as well. But there's a lot of good information on the website. There's some assessments for the Joy Switch. So I can kind of take some simple assessments to gauge my, how relational am I, and just start working on that. So yeah, that's probably a good resource. They can find the books as well. Lots of good stuff there.